Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Johnson, and with me is Evelyn Moldov. We are your co-hosts for the Interplay Podcast, a place where we ask and answer questions about everything non-speaking. If you're an individual who is non-speaking or unreliably speaking, or know someone who is, this podcast is for you. Come join us as we chat about the things that we have learned from the true experts, the autistics themselves, and listen in when we interview parents, researchers, and more. Here we go. All right. Welcome to our introduction podcast. We're going to say episode 1, but it's really the intro. Just to let everybody know the new Interplay podcast and what it's all about, and how Evelyn and I kind of sat down and talked about, what do you think about doing a podcast? And maybe we thought we were insane, but we're going to throw it out there and try it. Anyways, I want to introduce myself, Dana Johnson, and we're just going to take a little bit of time to go ahead just to let you all know more about us and kind of how we got here, and then talk more about the podcast itself and kind of the things that we are thinking that we want to include. And then, of course, this will be an evolving process, and we're hoping it's going to be evolving so that we can continuously provide information, ask questions, give some answers, and engage in some really interesting discussion. So I am Dana Johnson. I am an occupational therapist, and Evelyn and I are both here in Tampa, Florida. And I have been an occupational therapist now for just over 15 years, which is crazy to me. And for the majority of those years, I was the traditional OT, working primarily with individuals on the spectrum, really focusing on that sensory integration, sensory processing, fine motor, all of the more traditional ways that OT practices within pediatrics. Then it was about 6 years ago, I read Ido's book, Ido and Autism Land. And that is where I read the words from Ido that OT did nothing for me. And that literally initiated my paradigm shift, because I was like, what? But when he explained it and said, great, it was fun to bounce on the balls, to jump on the trampoline, to swing. It was super fun, but it did nothing for my body. So I started to kind of research a little bit more about that, because what Ido talked about was how fitness and exercise and intensity really, really helped to ground him. So that was the first thing that really transitioned my thinking. But the second was Ido is a non-speaker, and Ido has written two books at this point. So it was one of those things where I had a friend, colleague, mentor, Shelly Carnes, up in Atlanta, and she introduced me to Elizabeth Bossler and Spelling to Communicate. And it was at that point that literally everything changed. So I have been a Spelling to Communicate practitioner and training leader for almost that length of time, maybe a little bit less, around 4 or 5 years, and doing what I love to do, teaching and training, and still being able to work with clients and see families changed, which is just really a passion of mine. I also am the founder of Invictus Academy, Tampa Bay, where we have all of our students, kindergarten through 12th grade, use the letterboards as a reliable form of communication. Now, not only do we support communication and purposeful communication, as an OT, really focusing on the motor skills and the gross motor skills and purposeful motor skills, all while presuming competence, is an integral part of my practice, and then also a focus at the school. So that movement piece is huge. Anyways, and then we're fast forwarding to today, or maybe about a month ago, and I go to Evelyn and say, hey, what about doing a podcast? Just because I found that Evelyn and I would sit in the office and we would have these discussions, and I loved having these discussions with Evelyn. And I just thought, you know what, why don't we have discussions and then let other people hear our discussions and maybe invite people into our discussions, and just to show other people what we've learned from our mistakes, and what we've learned most importantly from the non-speaking population themselves. So that's just a quick introduction with me and how I got here and what I do. So I'm going to turn it over to Evelyn to introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Evelyn Moldov. I'm in the Tampa area, along with Dana, work at Interplay Therapy Center. My background is different from Dana's, which is why I think we have such great discussions. I have a background in education. I was an elementary school teacher for 14 years in Pinellas County Schools. Then also started working at Invictus Academy and worked there for 4 years as a teacher and also as a communications specialist. Right now, I am an S2C practitioner and educator at Interplay Therapy Center and work with non-speakers and their families, and just have the honor and privilege of doing that. It was about 4 years ago that I met Dana on accident through my best friend, who was taking her daughter to see Dana for OT, and just completely met Dana on accident. She said, "Oh my gosh, you're a teacher. I just started a school." And I said, "Oh my gosh." And long story short, started working at the school. And that's where I got introduced to the letterboards. And, it was one of those things where my whole world was just upended. I had worked with kids with quote unquote special needs, or on the spectrum, or, learning differences my whole life. And I've been educated in how to teach them and how to, help them with socialization and all these things, when really having these experiences with these kids, realizing, everything that I had been taught was really based on false premise. So it was a journey, to say the least, of just shock and awe. And just everything to me, it was one of those things where, at first I thought, oh my God, I had been doing this wrong for so long. And then I would always go back. I love Maya Angelou and that famous quote of hers where she says, "Do what you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better." And that's really been like my go-to, because I can't, I would think about, oh my gosh, I did this wrong for so many years. I did this wrong in education for so many years. And now I just go right to, okay, now I know better. I'm going to do better. And the presumption of competence is just huge. So now working alongside you at the clinic, and then also now I'm also the president of the Tampa Bay Letterboard Community, which is a local nonprofit dedicated to defending and celebrating the basic rights of the neurodiverse community. It was something that we felt kind of was a missing piece here in our area, just giving the families an opportunity to get together, to be there for one another, to enjoy life, to get out in the community, support one another. And it's been really beautiful. We get together a couple times a month. We do all sorts of things. We go to the park, we go to museums, we go bowling, we go swimming, and just have an awesome time really being together. So yeah, I think, I guess that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting to hear people's stories, of that transition. And really, I feel it comes down to just even that presumption of competence. When you do that, whether or not you're working on the motor or brain body disconnect, or you're working on spelling, or you're working on this or that, just the presumption of competence completely changes goals. Like you said, with like social skills and what are the appropriate ways to socialize. And yet, if you were to walk into any one of, the events, or like going to Tampa Bay Letterboard community event, and you as a neurotypical, you'd be like, nobody's like around each other. But then you talk to them after, and they're like, that was the best time I ever had. And so I think so much of it is getting out of our brain and kind of shifting that thinking. And at least that's my journey, to continue to do. So as far as the name of the podcast, obviously the name of the clinic, Interplay Therapy Center. When I was thinking about a name, I really wanted it to be something that we could encompass so many things into, because we do, when we're working with our clients, we're thinking about a lot of things. It's not just one thing. So when we're looking at the meaning of interplay, the meaning of interplay is the way in which two or more things have an effect on each other. And I think when we think, for me, the motor part of the brain-body disconnect, the motor piece and how it is just all over the place, definitely has an effect on how thinking, feeling, the relationships between families, the dynamics between families, the relationships with the spellers and us as the CRPs, our relationships with the families. I mean, the list can go on and on. So I think I wanted it to be broader, and I think that's what makes it appropriate for the podcast. So then we are going to be talking about so many things, mainly from the perspective of non-speakers. We want to ensure that their voices are heard and that they are the experts, so that we're going to go to them rather than, reading the research all the time. Obviously, it's a whole plethora of things we need to consider, but I think that that's really what we wanted to do. And of course, I'm speaking for myself. Evelyn, you can talk about it too, but I think that is something that was important for me, was to ensure that it wasn't just movement, or wasn't just relationships, or there's so many dynamics here that are involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, when we do incorporate researchers, let's say, and we are inviting them to the show and we're doing interviews, or even when we're referencing them, there are always going to be researchers who have taken the non-speakers into consideration and have used their thoughts and gotten their feedback. We're not going to be, interviewing those researchers who, have studied this and studied that, but didn't take any of their words, the non-speakers themselves. I mean, that I think is so huge, and it's important for us, I think, to make sure our audience knows that. Everything that we do is with them in mind, and their perspective, their thoughts, and their feelings. They haven't had the opportunity so much to share, partake in their life, and this is kind of the stage for them, which I think is exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and maybe our reasons are going to be different here, which is totally fine, but why did you want to do this podcast with me?
Such a good question. Well, honestly, I feel like everything I knew that I was taught about teaching, about learning, about communication, about socialization was completely upended. And when we interact with non-speakers or people, anyone with motor and sensory differences, it looks so different from what is really happening on the inside. And there's no other way to find out what is going on unless you are specifically taught the truth. You have to be taught what's happening. You have to see what's happening, and otherwise you will never know. And the thing about it is there's, we talk about the statistics, talk about, how many people are being diagnosed more and more, and whether, what that is, I don't know. Is it, doctors are recognizing it more? Are there more autistic? We don't really know the answer. But what I do know is most people know or have a family member that is autistic. And I feel like it's our duty, once we know what's going on, that how could we not share with the world what is really happening? Because without that, that piece of education. And you know what? A lot of people, it's interesting. People either, listen and they're excited and they are like, whoa, and off they go. And they're wanting to tell everybody and share this. Or people, or they have no reaction. But I feel like, when you came up like, let's do a podcast. And of course, immediately I was like, eek, nervous. But then I thought, how it's not about me. This isn't about me. And how could I put my nerves and make that a priority? Like what's a priority is that we get this message across to as many people as we possibly can, and let them know that these guys, these girls, these kids, these adults, they have something to say. They've got a lot to say. And if this isn't a cognitive deficit, this is a motor deficit. And I just feel like it's our duty. It's our duty to spread this word and to let as many people know what's happening.
Mm-hmm. And I have to agree with 100% of what you said. And I don't think that mine is really any different as far as my reason behind why I wanted to do this. I think ultimately it's getting the word out. And, we live in our small community and we are obviously building that community, and word of mouth is huge. But I think too, over this last 6 to 8 months, we've also learned how small the world is, with COVID, and then being able to use Zoom and have clients from everywhere, and then really start talking about it. And I think especially because of the increase in social media, but then also just YouTube is now becoming huge, and podcasts also increased just because people needed something to do. And so you have this platform now to be able to be out there with this and slowly start to grow. And I think the topics, like you and I, when we sat down, and we're like, okay, so this is the fun part. Like, let's start just naming off different topics and what do we want to do? What do we want to talk about? Because let's be honest, you and I can sit and talk for hours about anything and all of these things, which we won't be doing hours of podcasts, by the way, but, looking, but everybody will be able to tell we're just a tad bit passionate about what we do. But just to be able to have the opportunity to present information from all different areas through, like you said, researchers, and interviewing researchers and getting that piece out there, that this is what they're doing and what they're looking at, and informing anybody who, like you said, knows a non-speaker or a family member or parent, caregiver, and just what is out there, and continue to build the community, I think, because it's not only focusing on, a specific way to communicate, whether it's really essentially any form of AAC, to be able to get that info to parents about the brain body, I think is huge. So I think there's some components here, like we talked about, presuming competence, the brain body disconnect is huge, because if you don't have that, and that's where kind of my brain sits, is the disconnect piece, because of the motor and me being an OT, it doesn't matter what you use as a form of reliable communication. If parents, anybody who's there interacting with this individual, doesn't understand the importance of considering that disconnect, that's going to be really huge on them. So I think that part of our goals was to really look at who can we talk to who are experts in the field, and who can teach us, because we're always learning, and I always want to learn. And I feel that you'd feel the same way, that we're not experts in this area, nor do we profess to be. We're constantly learning. And then, take even some suggestions from some of our listeners, as far as like, who would you like to listen to? Who would you like to be interviewed? And then even have some questions. So I think my brain goes in all different directions with, what are our podcasts going to consist of? And I think it's going to change.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we'll have parents on the show with us, I think is important, non-speakers themselves. I think, what we might want to address, take a minute to talk about, is the term even non-speakers, right? Because our first introductory podcast about who we are and what we're doing. And, we've used the word non-speakers several times throughout, the last 10 minutes or so, but that is a term that is often misunderstood, because I feel like, non-speakers is an umbrella term that really consists of, individuals who do not have speech, right? Which is kind of what people always think about. They do not have speech to communicate. And then we have unreliable speakers who have a lot of speech, but may or may not be using that speech as a reliable form of communication. And that's very tricky.
I think I don't want to interrupt you, but I kind of do want to stop on that one, because I think for me, and you and I've talked about this, that is something that I think we really need to focus on, is that very, very unreliable speaker, meaning that they can be tricky with somebody that they don't know comes up to them, because they can carry on a quote socially accepted conversation. So there isn't a lot of information out there about that. So anyways, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure that that's definitely highlighted.
Yeah, I just feel like that is so important. And when we're meeting with clients and families, and oftentimes those individuals are the ones that they seem to fall through the cracks, because, they have some communication, and some of the things they're saying may be what they want to say, but a lot of it isn't really. And we've learned, and the only reason we know is because we have worked with these individuals, and they will say something, and then when given the opportunity to spell on a letterboard, they're telling us something completely different, and they're telling us that their words are not what they want them to be. So that is under the umbrella of a non-speaker. And then we also have what we would consider minimal speakers, where there is some speech, and predominantly they consider that speech to be reliable, but it's very minimal. And I would say those would be like the three big categories, right?
Yeah. And so I think that, it's having those individuals on our show and contributing to this knowledge base and educating others is going to be fantastic, along with parents, because, you and I work a lot with parents, and like you kind of gave the example earlier about how parents, some will just be like ecstatic and just like emotional and just, wow, this is just unbelievable in terms of the information you're presenting. I didn't think about it this way, but yes. And then others where it's a little bit more of a journey, to get there. And I think that by having parents on the show and just talking with everybody about their own experiences is just going to help somebody out there who might have a similar experience, and then be able to know that they're not the only one. So I think that's going to be really, really neat as well. And like you said, researchers, and like we'll probably have a crazy idea about doing an interview with somebody and talking with somebody down the road, and we'll just pop that in, as we go. But even just our discussion topics that we want to, like you had said, the unreliable speaker and how they can be pretty tricky sometimes. For me, it's the parents that say that and they believe that their kids have reliable motor and are able to do all these things. But when we get down to it and break down the functional movements, and again, understanding not only presumption of competence, but presumption of the body, and that they want to do these things, that's also something that I think we can talk more about too. Anything else that you think that we need to let everybody know? I
think that really covers it. And it's like you said, this is gonna evolve, and we'll see where it takes us. But I think those, everything we talked about, those are our priorities. And getting the word out locally and globally. Just getting as many people as we can to hear the words of the non-speakers and what they know to be true. Yeah, I think that's the most important thing.
And I think too, thinking about feedback from our listeners, including, the non-speaking population, unreliable speakers, just to help us, again, learn. And that will be something that will always, encourage. And I'll, in our YouTube, on the YouTube, our YouTube channel, it will say in the description, how to get in touch with us, and you can email us and send any questions or suggestions, because that would be fabulous. We are absolutely open to any suggestions that anybody would have. And then the other thing that we'll do in the bottom, pertaining to the particular topic for sure, would be listing resources and different websites, different people that you could read up on, maybe some of the things that we looked into, especially early on in our journey in terms of understanding and learning. So that will also be part of it. But yeah, I'm excited. I think this is going to be great, and looking forward to our first official episode coming up soon. So great.
Very awesome. Thank you,
Okay.
everybody. Thanks for listening.
All right. We will see you on the other side of the podcast. Thank you.